and di nuovi. I think in general, you could say that they're being portrayed as being far more cautious. And even though that's true, at the same time, they're also still suspected of wanting to take Genoa for themselves, to impadronirsi, they also say. This is also, I think, a cause of the very nature of the Avvisi, because they just like to talk a lot about the movement of troops and speculate on the meaning of that. And I mean, in the sense of speculate, that they try to guess where they're heading to. So they like to speculate where they're going either to Genoa or to Malta or to Algiers. So even though it's true, we still find in the Avvisi also the other side, and that is that they that the Spanish would try to take away the suspicion from the Genoese. So now that we have seen that that the Vecchi were very pro-Spanish, you could maybe also ask, were the Spanish very pro-Vecchi? And of course, to a certain extent, this is very true. For example, within Avvisi themselves, Carlo de Borgia is singled out as someone who wanted to protect the interest of the Vecchi. At the other side, it doesn't mean there also were no problems, as is, for example, made clear in the following Avvisi, where they say that the Genoese Vecchi are looking for men that want to accept the function of colonel, making many promises. But this is often left away, as they do not want to pay out money, nor show the consent of the governor, which is the Marquis of Ayamonte, or the Catholic Majesty. There's an Avvisi for Milan, and that's a very general thing you see in the Avvisi for Milan, that they're really focused on the Vecchi, which makes, of course, sense, as in they were the Spanish region most nearby Genoa, and many of the Vecchi actually moved also into Milan. And another aspect, of course, which is also recognized by the Avvisi, in which the Spanish had a very big influence on the course of this conflict, is one of the famous Spanish, or maybe we should say infamous Spanish defaults, to be precise, of September 1575, which also receives quite some attention in the Avvisi, where they, for example, have said that they heard that His Majesty suspended all payments to the Genoese, which will be of great damage to them, especially to the Vecchi, who they say have invested more than others. So it's also recognized by the Avvisi themselves that the Vecchi were more invested in this, and that in that sense, it was of more damage to them and damaged their position in this conflict. And this also continues for a while, of course, because in December, this is still relevant, as we see that they say that the Catholic king has published a new method to fight new monies in the cities of his kingdoms, having very little of them because of the allocations taken away from the Genoese. So this also continues to be a problem for himself. So on one hand, we have seen that this conflict is always seen within the relation of the big rivalry within the continent between Spain and France. But there are also other bigger contexts in which these are placed. And one of them, for example, is some kind of idea of the status quo of Italy, which we mainly found in their Avvisi from Rome. For example, the Pope, because it's mainly connected to the papacy, the Pope is said to want to create a meeting of all princes of Italy. And we also find it, for example, in the following, where they say that many princes in Italy have offered money and men to the Signoria of Genoa, so the Nuovi and the others who are left back in the city, so that the city will not fall in the hands of strangers, stranai, they say. And in that sense, we find sometimes some interesting expressions that they also talk about the created Italia, which I thought was particularly interesting because sometimes they enter upon a similar language that we would find, for example, at the very beginning of the Italian wars in 1494-95, in which they would also say things like created Italia. And again, here we see some difference between the volumes, because these are themes that are mainly addressed by the volumes that find their origin that are not under Spanish control. So we mainly find them in Rome and Venice, whereas in Milan, even the word for Italy is only used 4 times, and 3 times of this is just as a simple geographical entity. So as I said, this is mainly a theme I think often addressed by the Pope, who also, of course, again, has this religious aspect and like to see it within a context of Christendom as a whole. Already since the very beginning of the conflict, the Pope sent Cardinal Morone to Genoa in order to negotiate between the two parties. And they also report on him writing back, where, for example, they say that he is hoping that in 2 months will quiet down this republic that threatened to endanger Italy and Christendom. So here you see them both combined. And this religious aspect remains to be very important, because another example, which I've, for example, found, is where they say that the Nuovi would rather call in the aid of the Turk than to give them to the Spanish and make peace with the Primati, meaning the Vecchi, the old nobles, as we have just seen. And this also goes in the other direction, that they say that the Spanish and French shouldn't fight over Genoa, but should direct their energies to the Turk instead. So the general picture I think we have seen so far is that the Nuovi are very much connected with the French and not with the Spanish. However, if you start to look deeper within some specific Avvisi, you suddenly get a very other image. For example, this is one still under a header directly of Rome, where they say that the Nuovi, because the Signoria San Maestro Francesco Tagliacarne was an ambassador for the Nuovi to the Catholic king to open his bias about the sinister information, the sinistre informazioni given to his majesty by the Vecchi. So in that sense, it's just being portrayed as that the Vecchi tried to give the Nuovi a bad name before the Spanish king. And then this doesn't happen very often, but still there are a few instances in which we have within these 3 volumes headers directly from Genoa itself. And I think the interesting thing is that once you start reading these, even though there are many, suddenly there are a lot less negative about the relationship between the Nuovi and the Spanish king. For example, where they say that the populace and the citizens truly affectionate of the Republic and tranquility do not want other government than this Signoria Illustrissima, and always be loyal and of service to the Catholic Majesty. And even though within this very same Avviso, they still defend the laws of 28. And then a final theme I would like to address, because I think it's very central both to my research and to this conference in general, is the idea of liberty or freedom. And very much like today, I think it's very typical that a thing you very often see is that everyone at every time claims to defend freedom, to defend libertà. For example, in the first example I put here, they say that it's about the French king. They say that he offered all his forces in defense of Genoa's liberty and tranquility, and created the Genova. And the second example, it's only the Spanish, because Don Juan also, of course, plays an important role in the Avvisi of this time. And he would send a message to Giovanni Andrea Doria, who is, of course, the nephew of Andrea Doria, to make known that he had ordered from his king to aid with all his forces the liberty of that city, where they again use libertà. So they both claim to defend the liberty, the freedom of Genoa. And then a final point, which comes back at Casale, is where the commissionaries in which the fate of the city has been put, as both the Vecchi and Nuovi agreed to let them come to an agreement, and then they have to decide what they actually are allowed to do. And this is something that returns several times. And it's being said that they have the right to review all the laws, degrees, statutes, and uses of the government of the Republic, excepting only the liberty. That's the liberty they only can explain. So I think a thing you see here, that liberty is really understood as being independent from other states. So to conclude what I tried to say, I think we've seen that within this year, Genoa received really a lot of attention in the Avvisi. We've also seen that in general, the picture made is that the Nuovi are very much allied with France and against Spain. However, if we look to the headers, directly from Genoa itself, this picture is very different. And there the Nuovi seems to, or at least those left within the city, seem to be a lot more positive about Spain, while still supporting the laws of 28. In the same sense, we've seen that there are some differences between the volumes. For example, the volume of Milan was very positive about Spain and a lot of attention for the Vecchi. Venice is a bit more balanced between Vecchi and Nuovi, but had a lot of attention for the idea of Italy, as well as the importance of the religious aspect. And Rome looks a bit like Venice, but in general is more introspective and has, as a consequence, less attention from Genoa. In the same sense, you see that every volume employs a distinct terminology that's typical to that volume only. I would like to thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and I'm curious to know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Luther. I think that it was really interesting paper. I've not mentioned that you are part of the Euronews project, directed by Professor Dooley, which is precisely centered on these newspapers.
Very true, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you have done, both for the first slide with this quantitative analysis on the news of Genova that I found very interesting, something that I've never seen before. And then you have stated that one of the central point is that conflict between Vecchi and Nuovi that we have not mentioned very much in this day, but is of course central to the history of Genoese republicanism, linked also to the pro-Spanish and pro-French parties. It was very interesting your semantic analysis on the term of populo, on the use of populo, on this use of Vecchi and Nuovi, but also you have tried to link the Genoese crisis of 1575, 1576 to the Italian situation. And I think that also the part on the perception of the link between the Nuovi, between the news and the Spanish party was really interesting. I think that we have a lot of themes to debate in the discussion. So I don't want to steal another time, and I just want to introduce our second speaker now, who is Dr. Giorgio Tosco, who is currently research fellow at the Istituto Italiano di Studi Storici in Naples. He got his PhD at the European University Institute in Florence with a dissertation titled In Pursuit of the World's Trade, Tuscan and Genoese Attempts to Enter Transoceanic Trade in the 17th Century. Giorgio Tosco studied also at the University of Pisa and at the Scuola Normale Superiore di Pisa, and he was visiting scholar at Leiden University. Today he will give us a paper titled I più savi politici di tutte le nazioni del mondo, the Genoese political use of the image of the Dutch Republic, which deals with the identification of the Dutch Republic as political model for the Genoese Republicisti. Thank you very much and very warm welcome, Giorgio. I give you the floor.